Hello, I'm Azevedo and I welcome you to the Alternative Ways to Publish, Hybrid Self-Publish and More panel. And I'm excited to have with me today five amazing guests that are going to walk you through the different alternatives you have nowadays to publish your manuscript, depending on your writing goals and on your vision for your writing career. So without much further ado, because we only have about 50 minutes to talk about these things. I'm going to introduce each one of them, and I'm going to start with the ladies. So I will start with Karen Hodges Miller. She's the founder of Open Door Publications, a company that helps authors navigate the world of self-publishing. And then we have with us Deborah Herman, founder of Author Branding Solutions, publisher, author, and former literary agent with over 30 years experience in the publishing industry. And now it's time to introduce the gentleman. So we are excited to have here with us Jim Azevedo from Smashwords. He's the marketing director at Smashwords. And if you don't know, but I guess everybody knows that Smashwords is the largest distributor of self-published ebooks. And Jim is also a convert from Silicon Valley's tech industry. So we're going to get some really great insights today on how the technology can help authors develop their careers and how it influences the publishing route you're going to choose. And now I'm going to segue to Joe Solari, who is a strategy and operations consultant for authors and publishers with a focus on publishing strategy and optimizing publishing businesses to delight readers and meet investor needs. And he's also an author. He has an amazing book he's going to talk to you about. So finally, last but not least, my dear friend Russell Nolte, who is a strategy and operations consultant for authors and publishers. And he's a USA Today bestselling author, a publisher, and founder of the small press Wannabe Press and the Complete Creative, which helps creatives build better businesses. And he's also an amazing Kickstarter expert. He had some amazing campaign going on Kickstarter. He has one now, and he's going to tell you all about it. So thank you, everyone, for being here with us today. It is great to have you.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so let's dive into our conversation. And because I want to start it with, on a positive note, and because you have so much experience in this publishing world and you've helped so many authors, we are living interesting times. So I'd like to ask you, what are the current opportunities in the publishing landscape, regardless of the route? And again, I'm going to start with the ladies, and I'm going to go to Deborah and ask her to answer this question first.
I think we are living in a time of perhaps the greatest opportunity for authors. We have the conglomerates, which is the traditional route. I've been in the traditional publishing industry for many, many years. My husband, Jeff Herman, does this book every year since I've known him. And the literary agency has sold over 1,000 books to the traditional conglomerates. All of this has changed several years ago, where the focus on platform became a higher threshold. So a lot of voices and a lot of great books that perhaps we would have sold 10, 20 years ago were just being overlooked because basically the conglomerates want you to not need them. So they're going to publish you when you're already almost a done deal. But now, because of the digital world, platform building opportunities, branding, technology, a lot of authors, if they're entrepreneurial and they learn from people like the people on this panel, can actually access publishing in ways that they never could before. And so I'm sure we'll talk about some of the ways they can optimize and enhance their success, because they need to do everything they would do if they were going the traditional route. I think it's a renaissance time, and I'm personally very thrilled.
That's wonderful. And yeah, I have one of my questions is actually asking each one of you to share some success stories, from your experience and the people you've worked with. But let's see what Karen has to say about the current opportunities.
Well, first, I'm going to agree with everything Deborah just said. It is a great time to be an author. But the person who thinks that they're going to put up a book on Amazon and they write it and they will come plan doesn't work. There's over 2 million books being put up every year on Amazon. The great thing for authors is if they're entrepreneurial, they can be a success. And the other thing I think is they have to know what success means to them. Success for one author is not the same as for another.
Yeah, clearly. Some people, they just want to publish a book for their family as a legacy. But I think the authors who are watching this panel today are in that category that probably they want to make a living, a life as a full-time author. And I think that's where your expertise and having you here today comes in so handy, because you can actually give them different alternatives, because you all have experience with different approaches to publishing. So let's see, Russell.
So I agree with everything that the two people said before, but the thing that the pandemic did was force a lot of people who were hesitant about using technology, for instance, coming to StreamYard or doing Zoom or all of these things that, it was so hard in 2018 to get anyone to do anything digitally. And now, even if they don't necessarily want to do that, they are more open to it. And to me, that is the real advantage of what happened during the pandemic. I mean, you have to sort of pick and choose your battles a little more carefully, because you don't want to be so omnipresent that you're literally always doing a live stream. But a lot of people who would only buy their book at a convention or would only buy their book at a bookstore have had to use digital technology, and suddenly they're like, oh, this isn't so bad. I can get a book on Smashwords, or I can get a book on Amazon, or I can go to Kickstarter and still get the good experience that I expected from a bookstore. But now I have more ways that I'm willing to use it. So yeah, the pandemic to me it forced people to use technology and realize that it was not the evil that maybe they thought it was previously.
Yeah, and Russell, he's speaking from the perspective of an indie author who made it to the New York Times bestseller list. So we need to know how you did it. And you're also the founder of a small press. So we'll discuss what are the benefits for an author to sign a contract with a small press versus aiming for a big traditional publisher. But I like to learn what Jim thinks about this, since Smashwords is basically helping independent authors distribute their books all over the world.
Yes, I think it's really easy to forget that it was only 13 years ago that the book publishing industry was a print-centric industry, and the largest traditional publishers controlled it. They decided which manuscripts they felt were good enough, or rather commercially viable enough, to turn into published books, which meant that they decided which writers would become published authors. Then with the advent of digital publishing and ebooks and digital distribution tools, suddenly any author anywhere in the world with access to a computer and access to the internet could publish and distribute their work and reach a global audience. When that began to happen, the power center in the industry began to shift away from the largest traditional publishers and into the hands of the writers. I think where the power center belongs.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It is a great opportunity right now for authors. I think especially if you put on the business hat on and you look at your career as a business, and that's where Joe Solari has so much experience and can give you so much advice, because he's been actually helping authors who make six-figure incomes or more to manage their writing businesses. So, Joe, what are the opportunities right now?
Sure. I think kind of the theme that we've all been talking about is we're in this golden age of content creation. And because technology is making us able to do things we couldn't do in the past, distribute books, get the cost of production down, we're in a situation where the rules have really changed, right? And to put it into context, my client base of private clients, which we're at like 13 clients right now. Those 13 clients generate year to date $10 million worth of gross royalties. Like it's huge, right? Now they're a very, very small percentage, right? Like Karen mentioned, there's so many books coming out that just won't make money. Yeah. But if you do have content that people are that resonates with them, stories that in the past never could get to market, you can find customers that are prepared to buy them. And specifically to your question, I think it's broader than just books now, right? Because I saw your questions and I thought about this, it's some of the big things that are happening in audio, which Jim mentioned how digital publishing is just this, decade old thing. Audio 5 years ago, it wasn't possible to think about. And there are folks that are making more money in audio than they are in digital books now in certain genres, and like by a significant margin, because it's an audience that was never going to pick up an ebook, but they'll listen all day long. And so I think that's the cool thing that's going on right now, is opportunities around that, around translation, how you can bring this intellectual property into maybe a direct sales model. And I can think of a half dozen authors that are all like Russell here, who's exploring something that isn't the obvious channel, right? Like, why would you go and put a book on Kickstarter? Yeah. Right? Like, but it's a viable solution for certain people.
Yes, for sure. And I would like to know, what does it take to make into that very small percentage of authors who generate that kind of money? But we'll get there. But I think some of our viewers today, they would like to know exactly what are those options they have right now for publishing. Self-publishing, traditional publishing, hybrid publishing. So I'd like to explain succinctly what each avenue is, and what are the opportunities that it offers people. And Jim, let's start with you, because Smashwords is the preferred choice for many authors, as you just said, who want to go global, and who are obviously self-publishing. So let's talk about self-publishing.
Okay. Well, self-publishing, especially through our platform, is more of a DIY or do-it-yourself self-publishing platform. For example, what we require is that you bring us your manuscript that is formatted per our requirements. You upload it, you click publish, and we convert it for you into an ebook that's available in multiple different ebook file types. One thing I'd like to make clear to authors who may be aspiring authors, or even traditionally published authors who may be investigating ebook self-publishing for the very first time, just because you're self-publishing doesn't mean that you should do everything by yourself. I have the extreme privilege every year to present workshops and to go to writing events and writers' conferences around the country to not only present workshops, but also be an attendee and listen in on how best-selling self-published authors have got to where they are today. And I can tell you, I don't know of a single self-published best-selling author who's done everything herself from start to finish. If there are two things that best-selling authors tend to agree upon as far as what they must outsource, number one, professional editing, and number two, professional cover design. So just because you're self-publishing, again, that doesn't mean you have to go it alone, and you probably shouldn't go it alone. So if I would say 2 best practices that you should look for some help on: editing and professional cover design. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you. And I think Karen has I would like to hear your input too, because I know you actually help authors on their journey, and this actually confirms what Jim said, that even if you self-publish, you don't have to do it by yourself.
Yeah, it's been really affirming for me to hear all these people saying the same thing I've been preaching for many years. Yes, I work with authors. I always say I take them where I find them. And that can either be, I want to write a book and I've never written before, to I've got a book up on Amazon and now I don't know what to do, and anywhere in between. So I'd like to say, take what Jim said a little farther. I tell people to kind of make a list of all the tasks that you need. And that's, yes, obviously writing, because there are some people who want to do a book and they want it ghostwritten. Editing, formatting the book, because you can write a great book, but the interior looks sloppy or just not professional. Cover design, I agree, is, yes, books are sold by their covers. Professional cover design is the most important. After it's edited and formatted, it needs to be proofread. I am totally believe in evil computer elves who come in and rearrange your words every night.
It's true.
So after you have done all of these things, it needs to go to a professional proofreader who's never looked at it before. And then marketing. And how do you want to market? And then look at, okay, what I can do and what I should do. Because I do know authors who are also great artists and they want to do a cover. But should they? Can they really have the distance from their work to see it? I know authors who are great at social media, and sometimes that works. Personally, I know everything I'm supposed to be doing on social media, but I hate to do it. So that's something that I always budget to have someone else doing my social media. Just because you're good at it, will you do it? So prioritize all the tasks and decide what you want to do yourself, what you can do yourself, and what you can do yourself, but you shouldn't.
So basically, with self-publishing, is that you are in charge. That's the good part. You are in charge of your career. You get to decide when to publish your book. You get 100% royalties, and as my guest said, you can either do it yourself or you can hire a team. And I too, I support you in what you said. You need to hire professional people because your final product needs to be very professional. And then, you need to build a team, and then you're going to be sort of a project manager, not just the artist. Russell, what do you think? What does it take for somebody to be good at self-publishing? Because anybody nowadays can upload files on Amazon or Smashwords, but what does it take to be good and make it into that small percentage of authors who sell a ton of books?
Well, you have to really love marketing, like not just know it, but like really love to do it and understand that marketing is not even a necessary evil, but like the way that you will find new fans. And you have to be willing to get smacked around a little bit by the people that don't like you to find the people that do love you. And it's going to be really hard for a real long time to find those people. But once you do, and you have a little fan base, it becomes a lot easier to scale it and make it bigger and make it bigger and make it bigger. But most people will not go through the effort to run ads, go to conventions, to like talk to millions of people just to find a few thousands that really love your work. And once you know and also it really means knowing what you're good at as a writer. That's part of marketing for me, like knowing what genres you're good at, what genres are hot, what genres are what genres can actually support a full-time living, because most genres, unless you use a lot of different tricks like that I do, it can't support a full-time living just on Amazon. Like, I'm sorry, if you're a horror writer that writes straight horror, like it's a very small market on Amazon. It's very small. Like, women's fiction is a very small market on Amazon. You know, the most of the people who are really successful are writing in one of two genres. It's romance or thrillers. There are some that are writing epic fantasy or writing historical fantasy, but like, the vast majority of authors that are killing it on Amazon or other places are writing in those two genres, because they are, like, romance is big enough to swallow every other genre, and thrillers are big enough to swallow every other genre that's not romance. So, and it's okay if you don't want to write those genres. Like, I'm not saying that like that is the be all end all, that you have to write those genres, but like, you need to be able to look at a market and say, okay, this is what I have. For instance, like, this is what I have, and this is what this is what is good, what covers are selling. So like, if you write academy, like YA books, like, you want to have a like young girl probably on a cover with like, if it's a paranormal book with like doing magic, with like a school behind you. Like, that's just like the thing that, like, it doesn't matter what your book is about. Like, that is the thing that works. And like, you have to be willing to do things that work, even if maybe your instinct is to make something that is wholly different and new, because that's what most people say about covers. I'm not going to follow this trend. I'm going to go and do this different thing. And every decision you make is going to expand or limit your audience. And you have to be good at understanding that and knowing that, like, I write mythological fantasy with like a thriller spent. Like, there's not a big audience for that on Amazon. So like, I know that I had to go to Kickstarter to maximize the spend of the small audience that I had. I don't run a lot of advertising. So all of these things go into my marketing strategy. And in order to be successful, you have to be able to take the things that you're good at, the things you want to make, and know that, hey, this is going to mean that my audience is X, Y, or Z, probably, and I'm going to have to do A, B, and C in order to maximize that. Or to be able to say, hey, mermaids are really hot this month. I'm making a mermaid book. And like, next month, I'm going to make a siren book. And the next month, I'm going to make a book about demons, because like, these are where the trends are moving towards. And there's no bad part about doing any of that. But like, all of that, everything that is besides, even the tropes you write into a book is marketing. And the better you are at marketing to the exact fans that you want, the better you are going to be self-publishing, hybrid publishing, or traditional publishing.
Wow. There's a lot of work to put into being a self-published author, other than writing the books. And I want to ask Joe, so how many of your clients, Joe, who are making 6 or 7 figures a year are self-published? How many are traditionally published?
All of my clients are self-published. Some of them now have been offered traditional deals. And I think that gets somewhat into your question. Kind of what I've observed is some shifts in how traditional publishers are working. And if we put ourselves in the shoes of a traditional publisher, they're betting their money on your product, right? And if you are of the opinion that they should not only pay to put that into the market, but also give you an advance, like, that's a bigger bet, right? So what they're doing now is they're looking at platforms and they're using the data that's all out there on Amazon and saying, hey, well, these authors are successful. Can we go and do a deal with them and give them more visibility? So conversations I've had with my clients when they are approached by imprints from Amazon or some other of the trad publishers is, I probably won't make as much money, but maybe they'll give me more visibility and it'll help grow my business. So it's just seen as a potential business opportunity. But back to your original question, it's most of, when you look at my client base, none of these people you would pick as folks that were going to make it big in writing, right? They don't have MFAs in literature. They didn't have trad deals. most of them came out of an experience that they were voracious readers of a certain genre that said, there's no more books left for me to read. I'm going to go write the book I want to read. And to kind of piggyback off of what Russell was saying is I do think there's some opportunities because the closer you are to your customer and you don't have a lot of middlemen, there's a little more value to be split between the customer and you. So you could live in a smaller genre. For example, I've got 2 clients that write science fiction romance, right? This fall in love with the space alien stuff. It's a genre that traditional publishing ran from, right? And if you know anything about that genre, there was just a recent deal with one of the authors named Ruby Dixon, where she got featured on TikTok, and a series that she wrote in 2015, one of these book talkers said, oh, this is my guilty pleasure. I read Ruby Dixon's science fiction romance. And that series, she had 20 books written in. So she was primed for this virality to happen. And when it did, she was printing $1 million months, right? Because people were finding her book, reading it. That's something that you can't easily replicate. But the point of is like what Russell was saying is if you get in there in the weeds and you start doing this marketing and you start thinking about how can I really deliver a product that customers want, that they can't wait for that next book to come out, then this becomes really a business that can scale. If you think you're going to write a book and sit back and the gods are going to bless it and make it go to the top of the chart, then forget it. It's not going to happen. And you're probably going to get scammed by somebody.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, totally. So self-publishing is getting more and more popular, but still traditional publishing, that's another publishing route, it's still very popular with many authors. And Deborah, I'd like you to jump in and talk about that because you're helping authors and because you have this experience in the publishing world.
Well, my most recent book was Lightning in a Bottle. This was in 2016. I wrote the memoir of the youngest member of the Manson family cult. Now, I had written 12 other nonfiction books published by major publishers in the traditional avenue, and I couldn't believe this because the day we handed in our book proposal, which for people interested, I mean, I'm doing show and tell, people interested in, book proposals. This was my bread and butter for consulting and writing for many, many years. The day that we handed in that book proposal was the day that Charles Manson, the most notorious figure of at least the 20th century, went into the hospital. We got an immediate offer. It would have been a lot larger 10 years ago, but that was a viable, traditionally published book. And what I want people to understand is that even though that was lightning in a bottle, the book came out in October, Charles Manson died in November. Never could have planned anything like that in a million years as far as urgency and interest. I've been in 4 documentaries as the co-author. It was amazing, but only 2 months of marketing, even with all of that. And so, you were saying that romance and thrillers are the big bread and butter. That's always been the case in the traditional market as well. And what's also always been the case is that the author is always expected to do a tremendous amount of marketing and tremendous amount of promotion. And so when I saw changes in our business model and was basically given a self-publishing platform and decided, I've been curating titles for 30 years, and the people who were uploading, and much to all of your points about quality, they had no real editing, no real cover design, and no marketing strategy. And strategy is what's really missing for most people. So the reason I created Micropublishing Media, which is sort of more traditional, yet it's hybrid, because we offer all the services, editing, copy editing, cover, interior, but we're also traditionally distributed. So we can get our authors twice a year, we do the same thing as any other publisher to get them into the bookstores. But what we also do is we help them know who their audience is. That's where, for all these years, I have seen the biggest failing in the perspective that writers have. For example, they may follow a trend. They may say, oh, there's all these popular books out now about angels. But according to the traditional avenue, if those books are out, you're behind schedule. So you can't follow a trend. So if you have a passion about a certain subject, you should start your marketing and your proving of the market at the very beginning, even while you're writing. And so what we do is we use a lot of search engine optimization. We do keyword research. We figure out the exact audience and where they hang out. As our authors are writing their books and doing all of that, we're figuring out how to do a strategic marketing plan for them, utilizing the digital world. And so what everybody here is doing, I think it's a great panel, is looking toward that same resource, which is understanding that people buy online, understanding the competition for their entertainment time. So you have to figure out how to rise above the noise. So you have to have a great edited book so that people will talk about it because they're sharing with their neighbors more than, we do advertising as well. We do a whole, digital strategy for that. But really, you want that word of mouth. So you can't you could put all this money into a marketing plan and all of this, but if your book isn't going to appeal to the audience and it's not going to have its word of mouth, it's not going to go anywhere. So you got to put your time and energy into good editing, all of the other things, and then combine it with marketing. And that's what I have to say about it.
Oh, no, wait, because I have questions. So what kind of author is a good fit for hybrid publishing? And what is the major difference between hybrid publishing and traditional publishing?
Are you asking me again?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. Hybrid publishing, I really don't know. I know that based on the new models and what is happening in the industry, that I'm giving my authors a really high collaborative royalty because because I'm an author. So that's where I thought it should be more weighed heavily because it makes the publisher and the author incentivized equally to go out there and really market that book. And you share the risk. Because what happens with hybrid publishers or small indie publishers is if you are taking on the full risk of the printing and you're not sharing any of that, that is how we go out of business quickly. Because what can happen if you have bookstore distribution or you do a print run, the bookstores can return them. Now, distributors and publishers consider Amazon a bookstore. And because there's a terrible paper shortage, go figure, with everything else that's happened with COVID, I often, even if my model was print on demand, I often do short print runs to make sure I have inventory. And I have my own e-commerce store. And you want to make sure that people can get your book. Now, people love ebooks, but a lot of people also still love physical books. I'm one of them. If I took all the books out of my house, it would raise up 3 feet, because I have so many physical books. So the difference between hybrid and self-publishing is, I think that there are some self-publishing companies that are going to become more like hybrid because they're offering these great author services to make sure that the products are high quality. Now, I really, maybe I'll save this for my final words, but I want to caution people. I became a writer who could make a living at writing because I was a working writer. I wrote all these books I don't even remember. And my first book, I earned maybe 5 cents, 5 cents an hour by the time it was finished. You're not, you need to understand that there are a lot of sacrifices and a lot of people you need to invest so that you become successful. Because if you look statistically, a self-published book without any of these other things is maybe going to sell 10 copies. Now, each of you have created these great businesses so that serious authors who are ready to belly up to the bar, as they say, are not going to run into those roadblocks that will make them disappointed and will make them regret. They could have a great book, but they need professional eyeballs on it. And we've been working a long time to be able to offer it to them so they don't have to go it alone.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is wonderful that right now there are so many instruments available for authors and support that wasn't there, I think, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So that this is fantastic.
It's a revolution.
Yeah. That's going to grow. I mean, I've just by reading the news in the industry news that book sales are kind of soaring and ebooks are selling well. So maybe Jim, you can tell us about what's the current situation for self-published authors right now in terms of sales.
In terms of sales, well, I think the pandemic led a lot of authors, or a lot of readers rather, to either discover ebooks or rediscover ebooks. So we saw a bump in 2020. In the beginning of the pandemic, in March, that was the first month where things started going to lockdown. And then in April, we saw this spike. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think it was like a 20% spike there. Then it kind of returned back to a new normal. If I go back a bit, like back in 2008, ebooks accounted for about 1% of the total U.S. trade book market here in the U.S. The trade book market meaning books that are meant for a general consumer audience, both fiction and nonfiction. And then between 2008, late 2012, early 2013, the market in the U.S. just kind of exploded. It was growing by double and triple percentage points. And I'm talking about ebooks. Then we just kind of reached this equilibrium point in terms of dollar sales. Today, ebooks account for about 25% of the U.S. book market in terms of dollar sales. But one thing I want authors to really understand that when we're talking about dollar sales, we're not talking about unit volume. And one advantage that self-published authors have is that you have a lower overhead and lower expenses than a large traditional publisher would have. Your lower expenses enable you to offer your books out there for significantly lower prices. And these lower prices enable you to reach more readers, and you can still earn more per book sold on your lower cost ebooks. So just by way of example, let's say I'm an aspiring author and I'm going to price my debut ebook at, like, say, $2.99. My take home is going to be about $2. But for a traditionally published ebook author, their royalty on list is going to be somewhere between 10 and 17%, or 12 and 17%. So for them to earn that same $2, they're going to have to price at about $12.99. So that's one of your most significant advantages, because if you put yourself in the shoes of your readers and you're looking at two books of seemingly equal quality, and one's priced at $2.99 and one's priced at $12.99, which one would you choose?
Yeah, it makes sense. And price, especially when you're just starting out, price can be a decisive factor in terms of, okay, should I buy this book or should I buy another author's book? If
I could kind of add into some things that I observed the last kind of 18 months or so with what happened in the marketplace. So when we were going into the pandemic, we do business back office and planning for authors. So the first thing I did was look at everybody's business and see what would happen if their sales dropped by 10, 30, 50%, because I was concerned about what was going to happen with the shutdown. The exact opposite happened. What we saw was authors that continued to participate in the market. Now, some authors had personal issues, like their whole family was home now, so they couldn't write as much, right? They were dealing with other issues, but those that could continue to publish and were still, at the helm of their business grew. Now, as people came out of the pandemic, they started to see some things drop off. But the other thing that we observed that was really interesting was some trends in the marketplace within their businesses. And this is where it starts to come away from it just being about books and being about intellectual property. So we saw a lot of our authors go from 70 or 80% of their revenue coming from just ebooks to it being 50%, which meant that their business grew, right? Because the audiobook piece grew. Or seeing within the segment of ebooks, that their percentage of US sales dropped from 80% to 50% because they were now getting into translations, because they were getting their books into countries like Germany or France or Spain. So the same intellectual property was being deployed in ways that made the business continue to grow and find new customers. And I don't want that to be lost on authors, that story can be sliced and diced and retold. And frankly, who knows in 10 years' time how you're going to deploy that as far as a technology. We could all be having chips in our head that we just send the stories to. I don't know. But like you have that intellectual property, it's yours to keep reselling.
Yeah. It's especially if you have ownership of that property. Going back to the main theme of our conversation, different avenues, different publishing avenues. So we discussed self-publishing, we discussed hybrid publishing. Obviously, traditional publishing is still a big one, and with traditional publishing, as I said earlier, you can aim for one of the big publishers. And I don't know, Deborah, what are the chances for someone who is a first-time author with their first book to land a deal with one of the top 5?
It is viable, but they have to keep in mind that the threshold is higher. And when they are, I think it's easier possibly for nonfiction authors because there's a tangible content link, and a publisher can look at what it is they have to offer and see the potential and see the marketing. I think fiction, I don't have a sensibility. I publish fiction as a micro publisher, but I don't have a sensibility for it. I know it's very hard to break in as a new author with the large publishers, unless, of course, you're doing romance. With the real thing is a dynamite book proposal. And what I've learned since the pandemic, and since I created, more of the branding aspect of my own business, is we've changed the way we write book proposals. I put a lot of emphasis now on proving the market with data, using keywords, long tail keywords, proving what people are typing into the search engines, and showing that there's a real market, and not just relying on showing some comparative or competitive titles. Each part of a book proposal needs to be totally irresistible, because what people don't understand is that when you are submitting to to an agent or to a traditional publisher, they divide that document and they give it to all the different departments. So it's going to go to sales and marketing. It's going to go to editorial. It's good, and people look at, we've got all these sample book proposals. They look at this and they just say, oh, that's easy. I'll just fill this out like it's an application. It's not. It's a living document that has to be almost better than your book.
Can I speak to that for a second?
Who?
Me, Russell.
Russell, yeah, sure.
Absolutely, Russell.
Yeah, and please.
Okay, so I talked about marketing a lot before, and people always think that this is a self-publishing thing, but Deborah continues to hammer home this thing. It's like, if anything, it is more important with traditional publishing because there is far less spaces. So like Random House last year published something like 87,000 titles, which is a huge number of titles. However, when you think about that, the overall book world was like 1.2 million books that were published, or I think Karen said 2 million books last year. Like, it's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. So whether it's nonfiction or fiction, like, you have to write a slamming book proposal or a slamming book that hits the tropes, not just that are happening in the world right now, but almost predicts tropes 2 years from now where the book is going to happen. So if you think that, I'm going to get a publisher and they're going to do the marketing for me, even if that was true, even if you had an A+ book where they gave you a 6-figure advance and they were going to put marketing in, it is absolutely critical that you become an expert at marketing and knowing the market. That is not just where it is, but where it's going, because that is what your publisher is going to say. And before they take it on, before you even get an agent, they're going to say, I know where I can sell this, or I know where I can sell it with minor tweaks. And so you have to be great at publishing. And I just want to say one more thing about traditional publishing, because while there's the top 5 publishers, there's a lot of small presses and micro presses. And a lot of people ask what the thing is you should look for in a traditional publishing deal. And my answer is things that you can't do yourself. For instance, an independent author is very bad, even at $1 million a year, at getting into bookstores and libraries. They just do not. That is not the general place that they're going to, that they're putting their effort. It's a whole nother market. It involves NetGalley and the American Library Association and making a lot of connections. It's a whole thing that traditional published people have. And so I have a small press. I'm the worst person to get a small press to have a deal for. That's why I only publish generally my own work or anthologies that I'm putting mostly on Kickstarter, because that is what I am good at. But a human being can learn how to do Kickstarter and do all of the things that I do for them. So I never take other people's published stuff because I don't have bookstore and library distribution. So if you're going to look for a publisher, an independent, a small press, obviously a top 5 will do this, but there's so many small presses, and you have to find one that is going to give you the exposure that you can't do yourself. And often my favorite part of hybrid publishing is you can sell off parts of your IP. So for instance, you can retain ebook rights, hardcover rights, and sell off print rights and audiobook rights to other publishers. And that is, to me, that's as much hybrid publishing as going to a hybrid publisher. And a lot of people, almost everyone that I know that is even independent, that is successful, will do their books through Pendant or one of the other audio companies. And that is hybrid publishing, because their audiobooks are being produced by another company that has the publishing rights to that kind of book. And all of those things are things you need to look at an independent author, or as a self-published author, or as a traditional author. Do you want to give your rights for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years in perpetuity to a company? And what can they give you in return? Not just, I feel validated because I have a traditional publishing deal now.
They're not even paying big advances. And so you really have to look at whether it gives, that's why I'm grateful that as an indie, but hybrid, because my authors pay for certain things. So I can't say I'm completely an indie publisher. I have traditional bookstore distribution. It took me years. And people don't understand how insanely valuable that is, because it puts you at a higher tier level for credibility. You can do book signings. You can ultimately, it's economy of scale too. You move to a much broader ability to reach a wider audience. And as far as marketing, you need to know what questions to ask, because, for example, I have an entire digital team. So we do a strategy. We get the content from our authors, but they're not going to be, we don't want them to be, they don't know how to do indexing on their websites. They don't know how to do, a strategy for social media. We have people to do that, so they can concentrate on what they need to do, which is maybe speaking, and writing, and the things
writing,
that they have to do. So that, there are things that you can hire piecemeal, and that's why you need a professional team. But I really appreciate what you're saying, and of course you're hitting home on the fact that you're not just handing this off, and it doesn't happen by accident. You have to work for it.
I'm seeing something new, and I think it's because the self-publishing industry is now about 10 to 15 years old. In the past 2 years, I cannot count the number of authors who are coming to me saying, I published with a very small press or a supposed self-publishing company, and they owned my ISBN, or they own this part and I did not understand that when they published me. And now they're out of business. And how do I get my rights back? How do I get my book back? How do I get a new ISBN? So one of the things I've got to say is make sure that whoever you're working with, that you understand what rights they have, and that you know that they're going to be here next year and the next year and the next year. Because yes, getting rights back for people who self-publish badly is apparently a new cottage industry that I hadn't planned to be in.
Yes.
It shouldn't be that difficult because they still own their own copyright. But that's another question for another day.
Yeah, because
people are confused.
Owning and getting and using, and yes.
Exactly. It's because they're confused. And unfortunately, a lot of people who hang up a shingle and say, I'm going to be a great publisher are not necessarily, first of all, they may not have experience and they may not really know what they're doing.
Right. And
So,
they may be out of business in 6 months.
Buyer beware.
Oh, we certainly need to next BookFest, the spring 2022. Now we are at the fall 2021. We have to do another panel on the business of publishing, because it's obvious that regardless of the publishing route you choose, whether it's self-publishing, hybrid publishing, traditional publisher with one of the top publisher or a small press like Raffles, obviously you need a strategy in place. Not just a marketing strategy in place, but a business strategy in place. So this is one of the main takeaways that will stay with me after having this amazing conversation with you, which I wish we could continue for another hour at least. But we are close to the end of our conversation. So I'd like to invite each one of you to give us your 1 minute expert advice, something for our audience to keep in mind, to take notes, and help them on making this choice of, okay, which publishing route should I go, and then what is going to be my strategy. So whoever wants to go first.
Sure, I'll start because mine's quick. Like, you don't have to publish the minute you finish a book. You can take time. You can take 3 months, 6 months, a year. Like, nothing's going to happen. Life is long, and you can take time to master these things before you start. You can, if you want to get learn more about my work, you can go to kickstartyournovel.com, where I teach people how to run Kickstarters for their books at the head of their launch. And you can go to russellnolte.com to see all of the books that I've done.
Thank you. Karen? Karen, you need to unmute.
Yeah, okay. I hit the wrong button. Sorry. It's a follow through of what was just said. Plan your marketing strategy before you start writing your book. I have so many authors, even while I'm working with them, and I tell them to start planning. They feel that they have to write the book and publish it and then market. So they want the book out there. They're very involved in wanting the book on Amazon. And then they're like, okay, now I can think about making a website. Now I can think about this or that. Start telling people that you're going to be writing a book as soon as you start to think about it. And start with, I call them the 3 F's: your friends, your family, and your fans. Tell them all about what you're doing. They're the first people to start with.
Joe?
I'll add something.
Please do.
You wouldn't wake up one day and say, gee, I just retired. I'm going to now be a brain surgeon, and then become a brain surgeon. Writing is a passion and it's an art and a craft, but it's also publishing is a business. So treat yourself as a professional and learn as much as you can about different aspects of publishing. Certainly seek out professionals. Don't rely just on friends and family for your editing. and do it all top notch. And it could be very rewarding. And also don't focus necessarily on the financial return. There are many reasons to write a book, many reasons to publish a book, and the financial will follow. But at least there you'll fulfill your goal. My companies are micropublishingmedia.com and then Author Branding Solutions, and we're kind of a one-stop shop, and we love to help authors to succeed and find their niche.
Thank you.
The one thing that I would have everyone think about is the idea of this, what I call the reader-writer relationship, that this whole industry, if it's the ecosystem, is predicated on this relationship. It's like Keystone mutualism, like how honeybees are to flowers. If there aren't readers, there's no source of money. And if there aren't writers, there's nothing for them to spend money on. So the more that you focus on that relationship and making it stronger and a deeper part of your business, the better things are going to be for you in the future. Because really, what I'm seeing is everything else kind of becomes friction, right? And the closer you are to your customers, the better you can be in serving them. The more they're connected with your books. And it's not even connected with you as an author per se. It's how they're connecting with your story world and your characters, right? If they have a deep love of your characters and that's part of their identity, then you don't have to sell them books. They're waiting to buy those books. But again, that just manifests into what pretty much, Russell and Deborah have been talking about a lot, is that's marketing, right? You need to get people to understand how you're going to deliver on your side of that relationship. And as far as finding stuff on me, joesolari.com. I have a lot of free resources for authors to help them understand really how the publishing market works and how to use things like that idea of that reader-writer relationship to build strong brand and get books to sell.
Thank you.
One thing I wanted to mention was that earlier in the conversation, we talked about just the vast number of books that are published every year, whether it's in the hundreds of thousands or if it's in the millions now. Whether or not those books are self-published or traditionally published, I want authors to realize that the overwhelming majority of those books do not become bestsellers. In fact, the overwhelming majority of those books, if they're traditionally published or self-published, don't sell very well at all. What separates the amateurs from the pros are best practices. And you've heard a lot of best practices from the panelists here. These best practices run the range of hiring professional editors, to hiring professional book cover designers, to marketing, to having an email newsletter, all of these different things. So when you learn about some of those best practices, do your research, dive in. What are the best practices for book cover design? What are the best practices for editing? What are the best practices for having my own email newsletter or building my platform? Again, these best practices are what's going to separate you from other authors who, like Karen said earlier, are just kind of putting a book up there and hoping for readers just to come streaming in. It doesn't quite work like that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here with us today. And thank you those who joined us and watched this panel. Stay with us. Stay with the BookFest. We have some amazing panels coming up, amazing conversations, and a critique bar later in the day. So thank you again for being here with us today. And enjoy the BookFest Fall 2021.